Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my obeisances. So today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1, text from 58 to 60.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Так, пожалуйста, санскрит,
So Karabhajana Prabhu, can you please read Sanskrit?
Ekada Savanam Yata Pitri Sandesha Kritvija Adaya Tatavavrita Palapushpa Samit Kushan Dadarsha Kaminam Kanchich Chodram Sahabujishyaya Pitpachamadhu Maireyam Madakbhurnita Netraya Mattaya Vishlatan Nidya Vyapetam Nirapatrapam Kridantam Anugayantam Hasantam Anayantike.
Я прочитаю сразу перевод текста.
So now I will write the translation of this text right away. So this is the story of Ajāmila's life. That's the chapter's name.
Здесь идет повествование.
So here
Однажды
we have a story of,
Brāhmaṇa
we have some story to read.
по
Once,
приказанию
this brāhmaṇa Ajāmila, following the order of his father, went to the forest to collect fruit, flowers, and two kinds of grass called samit and kuśa.
Возвращаясь домой, он увидел
On the way home,
śūdru,
he came upon a śūdra,
представителя самого
a very
низкого
lusty,
сословия,
fourth-class man,
бесстыдно обнимал,
who was
целовал.
shamelessly embracing and kissing a prostitute.
Śūdra, как ни в чем не бывало, пел
The
и
śūdra
смеялся.
was smiling, singing, and
И он, и
enjoying,
блудница
as
были
if this
пьяны.
were proper behavior. Both the śūdra and the prostitute were drunk.
Блудница, полураздетая,
The prostitute's
опьянела, вращала глазами.
eyes were rolling in
Таких
intoxication,
застал их Ajāmila.
and her dress had become loose.
Тут повествование.
Such was the condition in which Ajāmila saw them.
Комментарий, что тут.
Now the purport of Srila Prabhupada.
Ajāmila среди бела дня увидел на
So while
дороге
traveling along the public way,
женщину,
Ajāmila came upon a fourth-class man and a prostitute
низшего сословия.
who are vividly described here.
И в этом стихе ярко описана представшая перед ним картина. Пьянство встречалось и в
So that's the picture that is
века,
so. Drunkenness was sometimes manifest even in
но сейчас
bygone
век
ages,
этому
although
порокам
not very
наказан
frequently.
живут.
In this age of Kali, however, such sin is to be seen everywhere,
Потеряли всякий
for people all over the world have become shameless.
В то далекое время
Long ago,
вид пьяного
when he
шудры,
saw the
пастой
scene of the
женщины,
drunken shūdra and the
превратил
prostitute,
Ajāmilу,
Ajāmila, who was a perfect
примерным brahmacārī.
brahmacārī, was affected.
В наше время подобные сцены далеко не редкость.
Nowadays, such sin is visible in so
Можно
many
представить,
places,
что испытывает
and we must
ученик
consider the
brahmacārī,
position of a
когда
brahmacārī
наблюдает
student who sees such behavior.
То есть Шрила Прабхупада, мы тут пока
So
приостановимся,
Srila Prabhupada,
конечно же, понимал, в каких
of
условиях
course, he understood
развиваться искон.
under which conditions ISKCON will be developing.
Основа нашего движения это брахмачарья.
And the basis of our movement is brahmacārya, strict following of
При этом
cleanness
бхакту приходится
and
это
simply.
делать в опасных условиях.
So it means that the conditions are really hellish.
Она заставляет человека,
So this hellish force, it makes the person
заставляет человека
have
делать
this lust. It makes the person commit sins, hellish sins.
это описано в Бхагавад-гите. Арджуна задавал
So
вопрос,
this is
что
all
это за сила,
described in Bhagavad Gita.
которая
And Arjuna,
волей человека
he
может
asked
совратить.
the question about this force that can actually pervert
И
a
Кришна сказал,
person.
что это вожделение,
So Krishna said, this is called lust. Lust has this
подавляет
power
волю человека, разум.
to succumb a person's will, a person's intelligence. It is higher, more powerful in some sense. And if a person does not have enough of a spiritual development level, he will never be able to control lust. No living being is capable of doing that. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that this is a very challenging thing to overcome lust. That's probably the most difficult thing to do. But it is possible, and that's the essence of Bhagavad Gita. How is it even possible to overcome the eating enemy of a soul? Kama. That's even worse than death. The spiritual degradation, in the presence of lust, is even more dangerous than the death itself. Why? Because a living entity gets incarnated and it brings all the qualities that it had received before into this present life. So it can continue its spiritual evolution by just having changed his body. But the lust, it destroys all the benefits, all the advantages that the soul has. So the major anartha is the lust. All living entities, including animals and plants, they'll have lust. People have thin or subtle forms of lust. We can feel love that is expressed in our behavior or creativity. But it's interesting that if love is connected with lust, it drags you down. And all these elevated sentiments, they're just elevated, they're just sentiments. And that's when you transfer to your religion, to your spiritual sphere. All the subtle sentiments, they bring a person to a level where the soul is interested already. So animals do not have this subtle intelligence. The body, it defines what love is and what love is not. You just choose your partner and everything's clear. But a person sometimes may have very strong sentiments, and he can understand that love can be very powerful. It can be an incaptivating feeling. As a matter of fact, a person lives searching for this love from life to life. Sometimes a person confuses love and lust. So the power of love is actually in the relationships between a man and a woman. That's how a person is deceived. So the subtle sentiments from the mode of ignorance, it leads you. Now, if you think about the life of holy people, they can give you an example of what love is. Now, it's really difficult to feel on a thin level the essence of life, the nature of God. Because in this physical world, love is really gross. So it's just, we think that God does not understand us, that He knows that we have love and some feelings, and we think that God sends us to hell for the sins that we had committed. It's all in the mode of ignorance, but in the mode of passion, we think that God is really punishing us. This is the material side of God. That's how the universal form looks like. So Arjuna was very scared of seeing the universal form of God, And in the mode of passion, people cannot think spiritually. That's why sacred people come down here to this earth. Just like Jesus Christ was sent here. He has given us a great example of not cruelty. He started talking about forgiveness by love from the name of God, comparing himself to his Father. So he had put all the sentiments into his role on this planet, and he had sacrificed his love. And this sentiment, people still have it. They pray to God, they pray to Jesus without even understanding who God is. And this sentiment, when they get purified up to the mode of goodness, this person can start feeling God. Just like a youngster feels some attraction to a girl. Just like these young people, they feel this. That's how they start building their relationships. So if you don't have any feelings for God, it's really hard to build these relationships. That's why we have all the devotees that help us with it. Or acharyas, they bring us this power, this devotional service to God. So Ajāmila was born in a brahman's family, but he hasn't reached these elevated relationships with God. So he was living according to all the prescriptions and recommendations. So he would just go to a forest to bring some, to get some ingredients for special ceremonies. And of course, Ajāmila, he had followed this brahmanical culture. He was helping his father to perform yagyas. It's all prescribed for the family people. We also perform Sankirtana Yagya every day for all the classes of people. In the age of Kali, that's what prescribed. There's no difference in practice. But in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is described that for different classes of people, different yagyas are prescribed. For sannyasis, 3 things are recommended. So fearlessness, purity and jnana. That's all they need. So they have to move along this direction. So to be fearless, only be based in Krishna for his support. And jnana, he spreads Krishna's consciousness with the help of his knowledge, and he supports pureness. So he does not have any conflicts, he does not argue with anyone. That's purity. And neutrality, that's for sannyasi. For grihasthas, some other rules are applied. So they have to perform yagyas. For brahmacharyas, they have to stick to austerities. But in the age of Kali, Lord Chaitanya, he has removed all these things. He said that I'm not either sannyasi or brahmacārī or grihastha. I'm just a servant of Krishna. Chant holy name, everybody. So he's just installed one varna. In the age of Kali, since it's very difficult to build varnashrama dharma, so it looks to be almost impossible. So he has just installed one varna. Devotion of Krishna is this varna. All the rest of the things are not important. In which varna you are, in each temple, just chant holy names, glorify Krishna, stay where you are. And there's one principle that we have to follow. So the principles that Ajāmila couldn't follow, we have these principles in our movement. So Ajāmila, he couldn't find the lust, and all his life is the illustration of a fall, spiritual fall, down to the bottom. So these tendencies, we all have them. Every devotee that practices spiritual life, we all have this inclination. So that's why we have some punishment. So that's how we see the description of his falling after committing all these things. But at the same time, even a sinner can get liberation. That's really strange, right? So if you commit some sins, you have to have some punishment. And in Gita it says, even the most sinful person can get liberation. So how can it be even possible? A person that is full of sins gets liberation. Sometimes not even all devotees, following all the principles, they do not get this liberation. But now we can hear a story of a sinful person getting this liberation. So very seldom does it happen that a devotee gets on the path of pure chanting of holy names. Sometimes people say, like, are you crazy? You can chant this theme for hours every day?
Что прийти на этот уровень и встретить в своей жизни расу Ачарью, увидеть его еще. Это совершенно скрытая тема. Вообще в Ведах практически не упоминается об этом. А пока осознаем
So Vedas do not mention still other things.
Это редкое явление вообще. Это ты еще будешь падать с брахмана много раз, прежде чем ты достигнешь такого уровня.
So you may even fall from a brahmana level many times until you reach the personality of God. But Lord Chaitanya, he has given us this rasa, the conjugal rasa. So we have an interesting detail. You can only imagine what our brahmacharis feel when they go out in the street. Just imagine what they see out in the streets. So when Prabhupada was just wandering around America, he saw people having sex in their cars. So he saw this world. And when he was given initiation to his disciples, he has given them these old disciples. So he said, do whatever it is that you were doing, but you have to follow these principles. His disciples say, Prabhupada, it's impossible, we still fall. So when we are here in Krishna's consciousness, when we go back to our job, we fall down again. So then Prabhupada said, men and women should be like brahmacārī. He was even against the prescriptions of Vedas. So he has initiated a temple of brahmacārī and brahmacārīni, like men and women living in one temple but in different parts of this temple. So he was even against the rules. And there were a lot of conflicts. So Prabhupada, he just didn't make any differences. I'm not this body, and that's okay. But when every time Prabhupada would leave the place, all the women, they were forbidden to even enter the temple. So because brahmacharis, they were not able to survive in this way. But when Prabhupada would come again, so women, they would enter the temple again, they would chant the holy names all together. And of course he understood that it was very difficult for his devotees, for his disciples, to follow these four principles. But without an institute of brahmacārī, it's impossible to live this spiritual life.
Подразумевается, что, повторяя Харе Кришна мантру, мы прежде
So
всего
that's why
учимся брахмачари.
when you chant
Прежде
Hare Krishna mantra, you have to be brahmacārī, you have to learn how to be brahmacārī,
Да.
to be insusceptible
И
to
главный
lust.
принцип здесь общение с Вайшнавом.
And the main principle is associating with Vaishnavas.
В обществе
In this-
материалистов это очень
In society of Vaishnavas, it's very easy, but if you live in a society of materialists, it is difficult. So even though Ajāmila was born in a good family,
как отец повторяет эти ведические гимны
So
ежедневно.
he knew these holy
Он
scriptures,
понимал культуру
he
Бога,
heard his father
он уже был помощником
repeat
среди
Vedic
монахов.
hymns,
Научил
and he was
ведического дерева.
engaged already,
У
in
него было всё
addition,
блестяще, хорошо,
to a
хорошо.
very
Но он увидел ту сцену. Вот, то, что
good girl, decent girl, pure
В
girl.
65 стихе, следующих стихах, там говорится, что он был женат очень...
So it even says that he was even married already.
Отверг свою красивую молодую жену, взятую из почтенной браманской семьи.
Да,
So he even rejected
подлинная, чистая.
his wife, that was a very pious person. It was a good marriage.
Была хорошо устроена с точки зрения кармы.
Everything was already adjusted for him
Но не хватало какой-то
according to his
услуги.
karma and
Да,
benefits.
раз он всё-таки
But you see, something was
способен
missing.
человек на это, да,
Since he fell
смог
down,
выдержать
something was missing.
давление камы. И единственная
So he
причина,
couldn't
почему
resist
всё-таки человек,
karma
а,
pressure, the karma's
может
pressure.
пасть в этом мире, несмотря на высокое духовное развитие,
So you
что
see,
он не утвердится
any
в
person
этом
can
духовном
fall
развитии.
down. That's because you don't
Поэтому это с каждым может произойти, пока он не
practice this
преданный
devotional
служению,
service
мы в зоне риска находимся материально.
on a strong level. We are all in the zone of risk
Помните эту притчу,
until we
когда
perform this
Бог
devotional
сказал,
service.
царя,
So you remember that
просил благословения
story
царя.
when a
Царь
king
сказал,
was asking
тебе
for some,
лучше не умирать.
blessings from a sage,
Один брахмачārī,
and the sage said, "You'd better not die." So one brahmacārī that have taken sannyasi, he met the sage, and the sage said, "You have to die right now. This would be the best way out for you." And then with this sage, he has met a butcher. He said, "Butcher, you should continue living." So the previous examples, they were connected with karma. A devotee that is connected to Krishna is considered to not have any karma. He can resist material nature. It's like he's water resistant. Even though you touch water, you don't get wet. It's only possible in a pure devotional service. Or yogis, they can reach it in a speechless meditation. While they are in this meditation, they are protected, but once they leave this meditation, just like Vishwamitra, he was meditating for thousands of years, but when he left this meditation, all his desires, they came on the surface again. So it turns out the feelings that we have to control, they are like the path to hell. All our desires. So it turns out all these material senses, they can be engaged in service to Krishna. So on the one hand, brahmacharis coming out on the streets, it's dangerous, but on the other hand, they spread books and they forget about material desires. It's amazing. So streets turn into a pure place, just like a temple. So the same transformation happens during Harinama. So we come out in the streets and we see this Maya, especially in big cities in summer, such a powerful Maya. You know, just like a contest of beauty on the main streets of the cities. Everything is alluring you. People and shops. So you gotta be very strong to sing Harinama in such places. and we see this karma go away. Very easy, it turns out, if you're concentrated on the holy name, and it doesn't bother you. All your senses, because are all engaged in serving Krishna, and you come out to be protected. So this is the whole culture of senses. When we talk about senses, this is like a whole culture that is needed to control your senses. But if you don't have this culture, people go to monasteries, they go far away to mountains, far away from people, when there's no bad, negative influence. When people talk about monies and women, conflicts, arguments, they like to apply some violence. And there you go, a person coming out in the streets, chanting Harinama, singing Harinama, spreading books, and it all dissipates. And people join this Harinama. Especially drunk people. You see, they don't fear what other people think of them, they feel relaxed. And of course, in most of the cases, they have no idea what they're singing. See, now, during pandemic, even sober people join us during Harinamas. Of course, there are some social conditions that people are afraid of. So devotees, they become shameless before the society. At first, it is really, it's a really shameful little bit, but then when you feel the taste of it, you do it. But you see some people, they just drink alcohol and they smoke cigarettes, in the streets. They are not ashamed of anything. You see, and it's a great sphere to preach on, to preach in this sphere. So it is amazing that people live in such a sinful life, they lead such a sinful life, and then brahmacāris, they come out in the streets and they preach about the holy name. So the range between the celibacy and just a normal mundane life, from celibacy to prostitution, it's all now movement, a great gap. All Vedic culture is in here, between these two notions. So everything is in here, and it will be manifested. Just because you follow celibacy, everything will be manifest in our society. So that's how Prabhupada created ISKCON. And he knew that ISKCON would split the world into two divisions. Everything will be manifested. Putanas, Rakshas, and demons and spirits, brahmacharis and sannyasis, everything will be mixed up, but it will be organized. So birds from different breeds, they do not mix. When you see some crows, you will see no swans in there. They don't mix. So that's how the world is organized these days when we preach about the holy name. So Prabhupada saw that it would be happening during the nearest 10,000 years, that the spirit will overcome lust. And Krishna says that this spirit will win if we use transcendental knowledge. Pay attention, transcendental knowledge, not even based on the mode of goodness, but the transcendental knowledge. That's why in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains this science, what the transcendental knowledge is, where do we get it from, and what it is used for, and what is transcendental knowledge. We have to understand that everything that we know, everything that we do, we have to do for Krishna. This is the transcendental knowledge. For the absolute truth, for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's all about the transcendental knowledge. Give everything to Krishna, and you become a pure devotee. Give your intelligence, your senses, your activity, dedicate your life to Krishna. Become a devotee, think about Krishna. Worship Him, and you will be together with him. This is yagya. Yagya is knowledge. So they used to sacrifice animals and then to eat them. Krishna says, no, no, no. It's ignorance. Yagya in knowledge. First you have to understand what Krishna wants. Doesn't mean that you have to eat meat. Krishna does not allow you to do that. It doesn't mean that you can eat meat. If you have lust, if you want to indulge it, you have to get married. If you just live to bear children, to conceive children, that's a good marriage. Everything that is not connected with Krishna becomes lust. So for such a brahmacārī to remain steady is very difficult unless he is extremely strong in following the regulative principles. So you see, that's why the sage, he has blessed this brahmacārī and said, you have to die instantly right now, because there's a high risk of falling down. So die right now until you're still pure. So that's what kind of a blessing a sage has given to this brahmacārī. When he met a butcher, he said that you live in hell and you will go to hell after you die. So everything is terrible for you. When he met a pure devotee, he is protected. You can live, you can die, doesn't matter. Krishna decides. When a good astrologist makes your forecast, a good astrologist, so he tells you, it says that you have this limited lifespan, but since you are a devotee, I don't know how many years you will live, because Krishna decides it now. So since you are serving to Krishna, we do not know how many years you will live. So Krishna can prolong your life. Write it down, it's really important. At least there's some stimulus to perform this devotional service. So when you're old, you will not even have to control your senses. There will be nothing left of them. But if you get a spiritual taste, you'll be more than just happy. Maybe I'm being cynical right now, but as one wise person, experienced person said, senses are good when they go away. The knot, the concentration of all the senses are in your heart, not in the organs of senses. These organs, they just give you signals, just like an electrical shock, electrical current, they strike you. So unless you have this really strong senses, they strike you with an electrical current, and they influence your breathing and the eyes and breathing. So the breathing becomes not stable. This is just lust. You just waste your life energy. A person does not receive anything when he follows the lust. This lust, it simply eats up all his life energy, just like the sexual desire. You know, just a couple of seconds and you lose your semen. After this, you feel emptiness. You know what? This emptiness is even felt in the like heavenly planets. So after losing this semen, even the heavenly dwellers, they go to Ganges to wash their bodies, but they feel really devastated, they feel empty.
Но как бы там ни было, если мы со всей искренностью
Nevertheless, if one
сознания
takes to
Кришны,
Krishna
то сможем устоять против
consciousness
любых
very
духовных
seriously, Krishna consciousness very seriously, he can withstand the provocation created by sin.
движении запрещен секс,
In our Krishna consciousness movement, we prohibit illicit sex, intoxication, meat-eating, and gambling.
а также азартные игры. В Кали-югу особенно
In
страшно
Kali-yuga,
пьяная полуголая
especially
женщина в
in
обнимку
Western
с пьяным
countries, a
мужчиной
drunk,
или
half-naked
сцены.
woman embracing a drunk man is a very common sight,
Сцены очень
especially in the
трудно
Western
обуздывать
countries.
свои
And
желания.
restraining oneself after seeing such things is very
Но
difficult.
если всё же по милости Кришны
Nevertheless, if by the grace of Krishna one adheres to the regulative
Hare
principles and
Kṛṣṇa,
chants the Hare Kṛṣṇa
Кришна
mantra,
обязательно защитит.
Krishna will certainly protect him.
Кришна сам говорит, что
Indeed, Krishna says that his devotee is never vanquished.
kaunteya, pratijānīhi, bhakta, pranashati. Поэтому все ученики,
Therefore, all the disciples practicing Krishna consciousness should immediately follow the regulative principles
постоянно повторять,
and remain fixed in chanting the holy name of the Lord.
нечего бояться.
Then they need
Положение ученика,
there
особенно сейчас в
there
Кали-юге,
need
очень
be no fear. Otherwise, one's position is very dangerous, especially in this Kali-yuga. So you see, our force depends on our sadhana.
Мы вот в таком положении с вами.
So we are in such a
Я
condition.
слушал одну лекцию, когда ученики Прабхупады
Once I've
обсуждали,
heard one lecture when Prabhupada's disciples, they were discussing the level of sadhana that they have to follow.
Может быть, она важна только в начале, а
So
потом
probably it's only important when you just start,
ручи,
like in the very beginning, and then when you reach some taste, some ruchi,
уже не так
or
важно,
nishki, like
соблюдать
the
строго
stable
садхану.
faith, maybe it's not so
Обладает вкусом.
important anymore to follow this sadhana
Но вывод был
when
такой
you already have some
впечатление,
taste.
что
But the
когда человек
conclusion
достигает
was that
нишки,
when a person reaches
его садхана становится
nishthi,
тверже.
his sadhana becomes even stronger, more stable.
Всё наоборот.
It's all vice versa.
Деление говорит, когда окончится работа,
Lust
я пойду
says,
наслаждаться.
when my job is done, I will go and
Такого
enjoy my
настроения люди
life.
живут. Они работают, но думают, когда оно закончится, я пойду наслаждаться.
That's what people,
И ради этого он
that's how people live.
ради этого он может
They work to have
свою
some
энергию
enjoyment,
ради себя.
to gratify his
А
or
в
her
духовной
senses.
жизни такого не
But in
происходит.
spiritual life, it doesn't
Если
happen.
вожделение уменьшается, такой менталитет отсутствует.
If your lust decreases, you don't have this mentality. I follow sadhana and regulative principles, and when I reach ruchi, only then I will enjoy. I will be enjoying. No, this is lust again. This is the philosophy of lust. And vice versa, it says that when you reach ruchi, your sadhana becomes even more stable because there's a taste over there already. So that's why sadhana never stops during your life. Even when you get this full liberation, you have to give an example to other people. There are no reasons to reject sadhana at any stage of your life. Even though, but we have an example of Avadhuta, Nityananda Avadhuta. But you see, he didn't break regulative principles. It's not like Avadhuta can drink alcohol now, lead any perverted lifestyle. No, it's all karma is saying right now. Avadhuta, even though he was a married sannyasi, he was following celibacy. Yeah, Nityananda Avadhuta. He had 2 wives, but there were no sense of gratification. You just have to understand his level. Avadhuta means a person living in the spiritual world already. In this spiritual world, no one gratifies senses. All the senses, they serve to God. They're all pure. So the material contamination does not touch upon them. It doesn't matter who this person is, man or woman, they just don't have these eyes of lust. So when Shukadeva Goswami was born, he didn't tell men from women. And Vyasadeva, his father, he could tell the difference, he saw it.
вначале могут стремиться к положению аватхуты. Но это же
So
интересно.
in the beginning, the devotees, they probably have this
Для этого
desire
надо
to
знать, должен быть
to
целибат.
thrive to the position
Многих
of
целибат даже в уме.
Namadhuta,
Только
but
на практике.
still you have to follow
Когда
the
достигнем
celibacy,
такого уровня, можем попробовать
not
чуть-чуть
just on the
пожить
physical
жизнь
plane,
аватхуты.
but on the mental plane as well.
Но все же соблюдать садану нужно.
Still, you
Это
always
наш
have
уровень.
to perform sadhana. This
Там
is our
есть
level.
другое еще предостережение. Если
And
Аджамила
there's
был
another
рождением
warning.
браманом,
If
всё
Ajāmila was a Brahman,
то
according
риск
to his
падения
birth,
для млечхи,
but the
который
risk of
стал
falling
на
down
служение
for
больше.
Mlechi, there was already on the path of a devotional
То есть,
service.
если
It's
вы не
even
будете
bigger.
соблюдать садану, пренебрегать
Prabhupada
саданой,
says if you do not follow sadhana,
мантрой
if you
и так
neglect
далее,
it,
вы
and if
снова
you do not
разойдетесь
chant
в
16
один
rounds of
потому что
mantra,
по рождению таких
you will go down,
джанма снова она
you will fall down.
победит рождение. Этот отпечаток никто не сможет по-другому призывать. Крепко
So you will not be able to overcome it.
пригвоздил нас джанма в стране, культуре,
So Janma has nailed us to our culture, to our country, to our
наша с вами судьба это садхана
vision
бхакти.
of this world.
В
So we have to
обществе
practice
вайшнавов
sadhana
каждый день
bhakti.
нужно общаться с
In the
вайшнавами.
society of
Это
Vaishnavas,
наша
we have to
надежная защита.
associate with the Vaishnavas.
Ну,
This is our
хорошо, мы немножко
very
обсудили, что
reliable
Аджамилы
protection.
начали
So we've discussed Ajāmila's
с 58 по 60 текст, 3
life
текста
story today.
читали мы,
So 3 texts we've read
комментарии. Мы
and
поговорили
commentaries
немножко
as well.
на эту
And
тему.
we've also
Пожалуйста, какие у нас
talked a little bit about this topic.
Спасибо.
Any questions, please?
Премананда Прабhu, сделайте короткое объявление, потом мы перейдем
So
к
Brahmananda Prabhu,
вопросам
make a
ответам.
short announcement, please.
Спасибо большое. Дорогие преданные, которые смотрят нас на YouTube,
So thank you very
присылайте,
much.
пожалуйста, свои
Dear
вопросы
devotees
на почту.
watching us on YouTube, please
Инструкции
send your
есть на сайте ajayvairagi.info. Ссылка в
questions.
описании под видео.
The
Те, кто
link
смотрит нас в
is
Zoom,
right
вы можете нажать
under
кнопку
this
«Поднять
video.
руку», и мы включим вам микрофон, чтобы вы смогли
Those
задать
who are in
вопрос.
Zoom right now, raise your hand and ask your
Благодарю.
questions.
Chaitanya Chandra Charan, вот комментарий мы прочитали.
So we've read this Purport today. Prabhupada says that
Один вид пьяного
a long time ago, if you just saw a drunken śūdra and a prostitute, perverted Ajāmila, that was an example, was a great example to follow a brahmacārī. But then it says that Ajāmila was married to a very pious lady from a brahmanical family. You know, I just thought to myself, what you said today, that grihasthas, they can be brahmacharis as well. So from the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there's some excerpt. Prabhupada says there that boys are taught by brahmacharis from the very childhood. When boys do not even know what sex life is, and when boys reach 5 years of age, they are sent to Gurukula. There are raised there in a very strict discipline. Without this preparation, a person cannot achieve jnana or bhakti yoga, or whatever it is. It's impossible. But still we have to understand that a family person that follows all the principles, regulative principles, and have sex only with his life, so he have to have some limits. He also can be called brahmacārī. So such a grihastha brahmacārī, that's a term that Prabhupada has come up with. So he is such a person, he is allowed to practice bhakti yoga. So other people like sannyasis that have to practice celibacy. So grihasthas brahmachari, they can have the sex life with the wives, but it's all have to be controlled. And eventually this person
Да, хочу тут добавить, да,
will
хочу добавить кое-что.
get rid
Аджамила,
of all this lust.
Аджамила в то время ведическая культура была, помните, Прабхупада объяснял, да, что браки были очень ранние.
So remember, back in time, the marriages, they were very early. It doesn't mean that they were living together as a husband and wife, but they were living separately in their own houses. They were living just like brahmacharis, of course. But they already knew that they would be married. They were engaged already. So that's how they were avoiding this actual lust. So they would associate, they knew each other from the very childhood. So that's why they didn't even think of a divorce during their life. They got used to each other so much, they were connected by service so much that they didn't even have a thought about being divorced. And in addition, a wife, she didn't become perverted ever. But you see what happened to Ajāmila. He was already engaged and married by fact. But still, he was brahmacārī because he was living in his father's house. So he saw some perverted person. It wasn't just a woman, because he thought of women to be very pious. But now he saw a perverted person, perverted woman, and that's what has broken him. It's just he didn't see this perversion in his wife. So his wife did not give this perversion to Ajāmila, something that he was missing, turns out. Well, it was like a conflict for him. It wasn't easy for him. So still, he couldn't forget that perverted woman. And that free love, this power, it won over him. He succumbed. So he stopped associating with his wife. So he abandoned, he left his wife and he married that prostitute. So just like Prabhupada says, a wife prostitute, two notions in one name, a perverted wife. That's what happens in our world nowadays, because we don't have this family institute these days. Nowadays, husbands, men, they do not even want to get married officially, since if their wife is a perverted woman, so why do I support this woman? If I have some money, I can buy whatever I want, just to satisfy my senses. So why do I even have to take on this responsibility for this wife? So that's why there are so many lonely men these days, even socially developed, socially prosperous. So they just buy whatever they want to gratify their senses. So probably that's why we have these demographic problems these days. Children are not born. Nationalities, nations, they just die out. You know, everybody dies out. You see what's happening right now? Men marry men, women marry women. You see what happened to Ajāmila when he got married to this prostitute? He started living as a deceiver. He started deceiving people, stealing money. He was like a bandit. He was cheating. He would threaten someone to steal money, blackmailing someone. This is just like a modern life these days, right? Isn't the world full of these actions these days? Why? The same reason. Relationships between men and women are not righteous. Where there is perversion, there will be wine and meat and not the rest of the things. There will be a lot of arguments in there. So when Kali was taking over his time, so Kali, he started living here in these places. He lives there with wine. So this world nowadays is in there, is in that place. That's why we have all these political and economic problems. So that's the example of Ajāmila's life. And it's really interesting that in the end of his life, he recalls the Lord's name. See, that's good that we're not dying yet, but we already remember the Lord's
Он не
name.
ужасен сам по себе, но
Well, you see, the world itself is not so terrible, but from the spiritual point of view, it is a terrible place.
картина меняется.
So you see, now the picture is changing because we are trying to recall the Lord's name.
Стали на путь освобождения.
So just as Ajāmila got liberated, we are on this path of liberation,
И
being
у
in
нас
this
есть
world.
иммунитет при этом, смотрите.
Now we have an
Мы
immunity
знаем
already
эту жизнь, да?
because we know that previous life. Most of us, we have the experience.
Мы уже
And we know that we are
готовы.
disappointed in that
Хотя
lifestyle.
вожделение есть, опыт
We already
показывает,
have this
что
experience,
дьявол
even though we have lust still. Our experience says that there's nothing interesting in there anymore.
Ajāmila там не был, и он пал по этому.
The point is that Ajāmila has never been in that life before. He was a very pious person in the beginning. He hasn't tasted that. Now we have our experience, that's like another protection for us. So ISKCON, turns out, can be very powerful organization.
То есть за одного битого двух небитых дают.
Двух-трех, да, дают. Смотря как побить.
So you see,
Если хорошо битый, то больше.
in this world, you can progress really fast.
Радишам прабhu. Поднимает руку. Пожалуйста, включайте микрофон.
Chaitanya Chandra prabhu, спасибо большое за это свое общение.
So Chaitanya Chandra prabhu, thank you
Хотел
so much for this discussion.
один рассудок служения, потом вопрос задать. Виктор, как лидер казахской ятры, вам хотел сообщить,
As
что
the leader of
самосознание
Kazakh
уже одобрено
Yatra,
регулятивами, преданными и профессионалами и готовы к печати, если когда-нибудь ятра захочет.
so we are ready to print some materials already.
Виктор природно говорит, что наука самосознания. Наука.
О, Джая.
So the book is called The Science of Self-Realization, is ready to be printed in Kazakh language. So I also try to inspire some talented devotees, new devotees. So I try to inspire them to translate some other books. So it's a great news for us.
Радышан не уехал далеко, вот он перед нами здесь, так что все в порядке.
So Radhasham hasn't gone too far. He's here with us, doing fine. So there's also a question. When this pandemic came, I live pretty far from the temple. We go to the temple about just once a month. So you said that we have to associate with devotees, and judging from my experience, like this daily routine, it drags me down. So what would you recommend me if I cannot attend the temple very often?
Обязательно в зуме общайся с преданными, конечно.
Of course, you have to associate with devotees using Zoom. So you seem to be very balanced.
Твой ум в порядке,
Your mind is okay,
тебя не беспокоит,
so I don't worry about you.
здоров вполне. Выглядишь
You're
хорошо.
quite
Но
healthy,
в
you look
зуме
good.
общайся, надо, чтобы ты
But of course, you have to
общался,
chat
участвовал.
to devotees in the internet
И
and
главное, это
take
хороший
part in some
шанс.
spiritual programs. And the main thing is that you have to chant 16 rounds a day. Thank you, Hare Kṛṣṇa.
Кришна Прия.
Харе Кришна, Ваша милость, спасибо большое за ваше время, за вашу лекцию.
So thank you very much for your time, for your lecture. I have a question about sadhana. You said that our path is strengthening sadhana because there's no other way to develop. And I wanted to ask you about the holy name. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj said that we have to serve this name, we have to serve the holy name. Can you please explain me what it means in practice? Thank you so much.
Госвами Махарадж говорит, а мне потом объяснять.
You see, Goswami Maharaj says, and I then have to explain that.
Хорошо, давайте обсудим. Это хорошее.
So okay, let's discuss it. It's a good phrase,
Махарадж,
what he said, what Goswami Maharaj said.
как бы, ну, ключевой момент, потому что
So
именно
that's a
в духе
key moment.
служения нужно воспевать Святое имя.
So you have to chant holy name in a spirit of serving.
В Ленинград
So remember Nirajana Swami attending us in St. Petersburg.
Брат, это были первые
Back then it was called
встречи
Leningrad.
ваших брahmacāriев, первые годы. Он привозил подарки,
So they were the first meetings. He would bring some presents for us,
чтобы пальцы обматывать, на бриданге разбивали в кровь руки,
while he would even
экстаза.
take us some tape to play on mridanga.
Привез бритвенные бритвы эти, станки.
So he took some razors to us, like shaving razors. So now we have a lot of them, of course, but back then in Russia we didn't even know about the existence of them. So he took us some razors, some tapes for our fingers, and he would have curtains. They were so great. Very kind of light curtains, ethereal, incredibly pure. The first kirtan, it was especially amazing. That's why the next kirtan was attended by even more people. But during the next kirtan, we didn't have this feeling. And everyone was thinking, where is this feeling of as if you're flying? Yesterday we were flying, but today it sounds to be different. Nirajana Swami, he stopped this kirtan and he gave us like a setting of mind. He said that when you sing kirtan, you have to think about how to satisfy God. Don't think about sensual gratification. So we continued kirtan and we started flying again. So you have to chant and sing to control our mind and senses, to satisfy Krishna, the holy name itself. So when we try to control our senses, they satisfy Krishna. That means that Krishna likes such a devotee. This devotee becomes dear to Krishna, close to Krishna. A devotee that is decideful and sincere, he becomes very dear to Krishna. So if we are waiting for some ecstasy or trance or something else from kirtan, from holy name, so of course it's also a holy name. You should be attentive to that, but it's best when you do not wait for anything. You just want to satisfy Krishna. That's one of the explanations of what it's like to serve the holy name. Damodara Priya, turn your mic on. Thank you very much for this answer. So yesterday I was just reading Chaitanya Chandra Charan, I got so inspired. It says that when gopis see Krishna, they feel this unlimited bliss, even though they do not try to reach it. So gopis, they feel this bliss 10 million times more than Krishna feels when he sees them. And gopis, they don't have this inclination to senses gratification, and in any case, the happiness grows. So I have just one question. So Chaitanya Chandra Charan prabhu, you said that maybe not all women will be able to get married, but some of them, they will marry Krishna. And Hare Prabhu once said that if women are not protected, so it will not be possible for them to open up their potential. So the question is, how do women open up their potential, be protected by Krishna? In ISKCON, all the women are protected. This is ISKCON, this is our family. In the private life, yeah, a woman may not be protected if she hasn't got a husband. But if she's here in ISKCON, if she is devoted to her spiritual master, she's protected. We have a different situation here. Not so painful, just like ordinary people that are not in Krishna's consciousness. Of course, they're not protected there. You cannot even have this comparison. In ISKCON, there's a big family that we have. We have this association between each other. There's a lot of good, profound association, so I don't see any problem in it. Of course, it might be not very pleasant to feel loneliness, but it's not a problem. And of course, when we say that you will marry Krishna, do not take it so literally. So once someone has heard it from Prabhupada, and one of his disciples, female disciples, so they did it formally, they organized a wedding when the daughter of this disciple married Krishna. It was like an official wedding or something. So Prabhupada, he was scorching them for that. So just like in Christianity, they also have this motive. When they become nuns, it's like they marry Christ, but on a spiritual level.
Chaitanya Chandra Charan prabhu, можно я кое-какие утверждения сделаю, потом вопрос задам? В связи с темой, которую мы сейчас обсуждаем. Потом у нас вопросы в YouTube, есть очень много вопросов.
So there's another question, and then a lot of questions from YouTube.
Вы сегодня говорили о культуре.
So today you said a few words about culture, the importance of culture and traditions. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, he describes lust as the most evil enemy that spoils everything, turns your intelligence off, and based on such a lust that turns your intelligence off, deactivates your wisdom and intelligence. A lot of miseries happen because of that. And then in the 4th chapter, our Acharya explains that basing on Srila Prabhupada's purports, kings, they had to know the science of Bhagavad Gita back then. And mainly they have to protect the people from this most dangerous, most evil enemy that is in their hearts. And Arjuna, he receives this Bhagavad Gita knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, and he understands that it's really important for the kings, for the leaders, to protect the women. In other words, to install this culture that protects women. Because, as we said, it's all connected. So now I'm about to ask my question.
Вот буквально новости последние. Талибан, он, по-моему, он уже устанавливает свои права.
So now, according to the latest news, Taliban is trying to install Shariat on the territory of Afghanistan. So they entered Kabul yesterday because Kabul just yielded. So it's interesting that Taliban, even though considered to be a forbidden extremist or terroristical organization, so they have some strict rules. So the women, they should cover their bodies. And so I've heard in news that some women, they were punished because they didn't cover their faces. So they are trying to protect the women in a radical way, so that there's no lust. So the point is that we are talking about it on a philosophical level. And now you take another Western culture, the absence of culture, actually, when women are free. We've just mentioned some problems about the absence of a culture, mixing up cultures, mixing up of genders, and what it leads to. This lust does not get satisfied ever.
потом
So you see, we have this
как
monogender
водораздел между мужчиной и
marriages,
женщиной, появляются какие-то многие, как называется, а, гендер,
like
что-то
monosexual
было.
marriages.
И вот и так далее, там вот две крайности.
So we have two extremities here, you see.
Мой вопрос,
So the question is,
опять возвращаясь к культуре,
again coming back
культура это та,
to the question
которая
of
вот
culture,
защищает от
the culture
провождения,
is the one that
защищает женщин.
protects you from perversion
А вам вопрос,
and
может быть,
protects
немножко
women.
провокационный.
So maybe
Какой из них?
a little bit of a provocative
Одна вот другая
question. So which
другая
culture
крайность, где нет
out of
никакого.
these two
Что бы
extremities,
предпочли? Что лучше?
which one would you prefer? Which one is better?
Лучше та культура, где возможно распространять сейчас духовные знания.
The culture, that culture is better, that is
Это главный момент.
ready to spread the spiritual knowledge. People may understand that lust is the biggest enemy. They may know it from the scriptures or from elders, also according to their own experience, or they just believe the sacred scriptures, and they understand that enemy is their enemy. But without a spiritual knowledge, they will try to suppress women. That's the point. You see, it also happened during the Inquisition times, because they would just burn women on fire because they thought that devil was living inside of them. Just because these women were beautiful, they would get burned. So just because of the beauty of the women, they had to cover themselves, not to even provoke men. But it's not a culture. The culture is when you refer to a woman as to your mother. And it was in the Islamic world as well. The way you relate to your mother, to your sister, because people that were more spiritual, more religious. The meaning of this control is to give religion to people, give God to people. And when the person already receives God, understands who God is, and controls his senses, you see, he controls himself already. You don't have to burn anyone, beat anyone, to abuse women. So these two extremities, they come from demoniac culture, two extremities. One extremity, another extremity, this is all demoniac. It's in duality, very strong duality. They become enemies to each other. The Western world, when we have this emancipation, perverted moral principles, and the Eastern culture, they've become enemies to each other. But none of them is correct until there's a conscious of God in there. When we see some people easily control their senses, naturally, but the others, it's difficult for them to control their feelings, but still they might have this association with spiritual people. But you see, we don't have to go down to the point when we just burn women just for the fact that they're beautiful. So there has to be a power of spirit limiting us, because illicit sex is a violence, of course. There will be always some consequences, terrible consequences. In our movement, there are some devotees that follow celibacy, devotees that cannot follow celibacy, but we still listen to Srimad Bhagavatam, we chant holy names, and we get purified. So there has to be balance in our movement. So when these examples of purity disappear, that's when we have some problems. We have to have this pureness, this pure jnani. That's what sannyasis give us. Renounced people, they don't need to make money anymore, to collect some material things.
ежедневная джапа, принятие гостей,
So everyday japa,
сада, заботиться о бедных,
spreading prasadam,
распространять знания.
inviting
Вот
guests,
эти только хорошие
spreading
занятия.
knowledge.
Это нас
See,
всё
so many
защищает
things
от
that we
вожделения.
could engage ourselves in.
А просто запреты выдвигать,
These
в
things
нашем
all
движении
protect us
тоже
from
надо
lust.
бред серьезный.
We
Просто
can't
начнем
just
давить,
forbid
это
everything
бред.
if we just
Да,
press
тоже обратный результат будет.
or push or make devotees
Нет,
do
нужно
whatever
им
it is needed to be
вдохновлять.
done. No, you have to
Нужно
inspire them. We have to have
Я
this
всё же
spiritual
ни
development.
там, ни там не останусь, я
So,
высоко
Bhajana Prabhu, I'm not going to stay
не
either
пойду я к Талибану,
there or
не
here.
пойду в
I'm going to
Америку.
stay in ISKCON. I'm not going to go to Taliban or to America. I'm staying here in Krishna's consciousness.
Давайте перейдем к вопросам.
So, from Nanda Prabhu, let's read the questions from YouTube.
Прабху. Может ли душа, пришедшая с миссией проповеди послания Господа Чайтаньи, обусловиться в
so,
материальном мире
Having come here with the Lord,
или же нет?
with the
Или
Lord
это
Chaitanya's
дело обычных людей?
mission, get
Или же
into
майя
illusion?
настолько сильна, что и даже великие
Or it's just
избранные души
this
могут
Maya
попасть?
works only for usual people?
Тот, кто находится под защитой Господа, никогда
The one that is protected by God never falls
Таня
down.
сказал об этом.
So Lord Chaitanya, he
Сказал
said
об
about
этом
that.
Санатане Госвами.
He said it to Sanatana Goswami.
Хорош тот слуга,
That servant is good.
славен тот слуга,
That servant
который
is
продолжает
sweet,
служить своему хозяину, даже
that
когда
continues
не обращает
serving
никакого
his master,
внимания и не отвечает ему ничем.
even when that master does not pay any attention to his
И
servant.
славен тот господин,
This is a glorified servant.
когда, если его слуга падает и отвлекается
And the
на
master
что-то,
is
славен тот
great,
господин, который за волосы берет и обратно возвращает.
that protects his servant. Even the servant had fallen down before. If there's a protection of Lord Chaitanya, it's impossible to fall down.
Господь Чайтанья за волосы вытащит любого.
Lord Chaitanya will
Это же бхакти.
lift you up,
Это невозможно разорвать. Поймите, если чистая бхакти-йога,
even holding your ears. It's impossible to fall down if you're in Lord Chaitanya's consciousness.
в иллюзию, правда?
If it's just a lila or a game, let's just take a look at Arjuna. It's like as if he was in this illusion. No, it was just a lila.
Кришна его тут же поднимает на трансцендентный
It was shown to us that Krishna brings you up on a transcendental level right away.
тут же его поднимает на
Instantly, when it happened to Arjuna, Krishna took him even higher than he had been before.
Чтобы уйти из духовного мира в материальный, нужно же иметь желание.
In order to leave the spiritual world and trade it for the material one, you have to have a desire.
Следующий вопрос.
Next question.
Мадхура Гита Матаджи. Харе Кришна, примите мои низкие
So,
поклоны.
Hare Krishna,
Махарадж.
please accept my
А
humble
можно ли в ближайшее
obeisances.
время приехать в Гуру Ашрам на вторую инициацию? У меня готовы все документы.
Can I come to
а
Guru
если
Ashram
нет,
for the
можно ли
second
мне пригласить
initiation?
божеств?
All my
Для меня
documents
60
are
лет. Первая
ready.
инициация была 3
And
года
can I
назад.
bring
Я
deity
служил в
with me?
коллективе ваших
My first
переводчиков.
initiation was 3 years ago. I also serve as a translator for your lectures and for Valmiki Prabhu. Well, you have to contact our administration,
Конечно, можно приехать. Просто
and of course you can.
как, когда, как это лучше.
Just contact our administration, they will tell you what to
Касательно
do.
божеств,
And
заняться божествам, нужна вторая.
regarding deity, if you want to worship deities, you have to have a second initiation.
Дхармапада, Прабху.
So another question by
Практикую более
Dharmapada.
10 лет, сейчас пришло желание соблюдать садхану.
Been practicing for more than 10 years, and now I don't have a desire to practice sadhana.
За это
I see
время
that this
никто не
knowledge
присоединился.
does not accept anyone. I don't see
Вообще
anyone
напала лень. Как
joining
выйти из
this
этого состояния?
movement
Джапа повторяй, служа
in these
божествам,
years.
один
So I
два
chant
раза в неделю.
japa, worship deities 1 or 2
Если
times a
есть
day.
какое-то
So what am I
ощущение
supposed to do
неудачи,
if I lose this feeling, this
трудно
taste?
переживать.
So of course, if there's some
В этом случае, если у меня, скажем, что-то не получается, я
success is
помогаю
missing in your
тому,
life.
получается. И я
look,
здесь
if it happens in my life, I help someone that is
скажем,
successful in
лично,
it.
скажем, моя проповедь никого не вдохновляет,
So
тогда я
if my
помогаю тому, кто
Preaching does not inspire anyone, then I help someone
такую же милость.
who preaches better than me. In this case, I get the same mercy of Lord Chaitanya.
Хорошо?
Прабху. В общество преданных проникает невежество и культура материалистов. Для некоторых становится
So now
нормальным
the
строить отношения без цели
society
создания семьи.
of devotees
Стоит ли
they're being infiltrated by some impurities right now. A lot of devotees, they even have some relationships with women without marriage. Can we call it prostitution? Well, yes, in this context, it is prostitution, but don't worry about it too much, because it's up to, it's a personal thing. Just become a devotee, pure devotee. Anything can infiltrate our society, and anyone. Smoking and drugs and alcohol, so many things. We couldn't even imagine it back in the past. Even homosexuals and bisexuals, they can even infiltrate, and transvestites. Anyone can join, because the gates are open. And anyone can leave this movement. Your task, your mission is to become a pure devotee, but not in Yamaduta. But you become Yamaduta, that's why you get distracted. The only way out is to become a pure devotee. Doesn't matter what other people do. Of course they do it because they used to do it before. They can't have another lifestyle because they came from a terrible culture. But our culture was cleaner back then. Of course we received these people from that culture, from Jyoti culture. Sometimes people come straight from hell and they want to join ISKCON. They say, give me an initiation. You still can see these fumes coming out of his body from hell. This vapor, this smoke. You see, they still have these habits. These habits are really hard to be overcome. Think about your self-realization. So please help to understand. Now you said that we said that women are perverted already. Does it happen just because we women are born this way? Come on, it's not about women, it's all about men. They've spoiled everything. So now we're going to burn women again on the bonfires. No, this is an ignorance. No, men are to be blamed. Women depend on men. Women become the way men want them to be. Men should be working on them. So you have to be pious, man, and the women, they will become pious as well. Can I add something? As far as I understand it, even modern devotees, the psychologists, they talk a bit like Mali Kamala. I've heard it from her as well. And before that I had read that in Vedas somewhere. A girl, she is full by herself. She is born into this world with all these principles, with all these necessities. All the necessary things are already inside of her. Whereas boys, they need to be taught. We have to kind of shape them. We have to help them to form their identities. Disciplined brahmacharis, they need to be taught to become men. And I've also found something else concerning girls. Even a little girl, a 5-year-old girl, she already has this inclination to attract the opposite gender because she's a mother. And children are not born without a mutual attraction. Just like Krishna says, laws that do not contradict the principles. So the culture is very important. When there's culture and this playfulness of a girl, it all can be a celibacy or shyness. So by the way, Prabhupada says about shyness, a girl is shy, right? And it actually attracts men. Shy girls, they completely attract men, and men are completely attracted to shy girls. And when there is no culture and men do not protect their women, understanding the nature of
праве и так далее, то,
women,
соответственно, это уже естественное хотелство превращается в вожделение.
this equality and stuff, and of course this playfulness of girl, it turns into lust.
В том числе. Не в том числе, а поэтому культура очень важна.
So culture is very important.
Сегодня тоже упомянули. Я упомянул.
So the culture that you've mentioned today already, in Uzbekistan, there are many different regions, and back in time, it was quite popular, of course, but
Андижанская область. Там
now I just wanted to mention something. In some areas,
обращаются
the
к своим маленьким девочкам,
fathers, they still treat their
матаджи.
daughters as mataji,
То есть она кыз,
as
говорят.
to mataji.
Она означает
Onat, they
дочь,
say
мать.
onatis, it means daughter and mother
Она в узбекском хорошо звучит.
at the same
Она
level.
мать, девочка. То есть таким образом они
So mother and daughter in the same
чувство материнства,
face, is the same identity.
и чувство
So that's why they
материнства.
treat their girls like already mothers.
Вот это называется культура.
So that's what's called culture.
Культуру должны защищать, охранять как раз таки мужчины.
And culture should be protected by men.
Григорий Прабhu. Растолкуйте, пожалуйста, все мы духовные частички Господа Кришны.
So we're all spiritual particles of Krishna in different physical bodies. So why even understanding that I'm a soul, a pure devotee,
Разделяет и поддерживает разделение как минимум по половому признаку.
pure devotees sometimes
Простите мое невежество, особенно сильно это
they split
заметно в русской литературе.
people according to
И постоянно
genders.
ставят акценты на различия мужчин и женщин.
And even in Vedic culture, we put an accent on the difference between men and women.
Указывает, что в этом опасность.
Yes, of course, Vedas, they point that there's a trap of Maya in it. There's a danger in it.
Много уделяется время,
That's why
место для обсуждения.
there's a lot of discussion around this topic.
Стержень, да, как бы материального существования, это
So the
влечение.
core of the material
Вся
existence
духовная жизнь направлена на
is
очищение
the sexual attraction.
и на
On all the
влечение Кришны.
activities, they're all directed
Все привлекают. То есть, когда вы
to
достигли
this.
уже Кришны, то
And when you have already reached
до той поры
Krishna, you are all protected, you're in safety.
культуре
Until that time, you have to follow the culture, just like Ajāmila prabhu said,
проникало в разум.
so that lust does not enter, does not infiltrate your intelligence.
О защите женщин,
When you are talking about the women protection, so what kind of protection are we talking about here? Protection from the illicit sex. Any man is inclined to exploit a beautiful woman, to look at this woman with lust. That's why we are talking about the protection of a woman. She has to be married. Either it's her father or her sons. We have to protect women from these lusty eyes of other men. So they transform culture according to their lusty desires. And women, they're just like fire. So when a fire gets in contact with butter, this fire just grows, and that's how we destroy each other spiritually. That's how we interact these days. That's why Vedas, they give us these regulative principles, and the culture, and the way we treat women. So there are three things of saying of how to treat other people's property, how to treat women, how to treat other people. These three main points. So we look at every woman as a mother, except your wife. Then you see at someone else's property as a waste, so something that is not important. And then you treat all the people just like the way you would like them to treat you, with respect and honor. These days, Shravanam, Kirtanam, that's all we need. When you talk about God, think about God, this is enough these days, no other rules. It includes everything else. So Abraham is raising his hand, I'm turning his mic on.
Hare Kṛṣṇa, меня слышно?
Hare Krishna, can you hear me? Please accept my obeisances. So I've been thinking about the society that we are trying to build, Vedic or Vaishnava culture. On the one hand, we know that in Vedic culture, just like in Sharia to some extent, some rules they coincide. For example, there's a death penalty for killing, so killing is punished with killing. If you steal something, your head is being cut off. So Vedic culture, it was based on such laws, and we kind of understand why it was like that, why it was so important. Just the way we were explained. You kind of repent your sin. You don't have to go to hell. So if you kill someone and if you are punished with death penalty for that, you purify yourself, you purify the sin. Or if your hand is cut off for stealing something. But on the other hand, Vaishnava society has some other variants of repentance. When you repent, you make it up for your sins of if you swim in sacred waters, you repent your sins. And there are some other methods. So there's a question arising. Why do we repent through a death penalty or having your hand cut off? And if we take a look at it, if hands would still cut off, I think most of the people would be one-handed in our country. So what kind of society are we trying to build? Based on Vedic principles or some more elevated principles of compassion. So there's no controversy to the standards described in Vedic knowledge. So please consider place, time, and circumstances. So Vedic culture and Vaishnava culture, there are a lot of common things and a lot of differences. Common thing is that both Vedic culture and Vaishnava culture are in all the mode of goodness in the material world, the same mode, same guna. The difference is that Vedic culture, if there's a lack of mode of goodness in the society, the effect would be quite the opposite. If you chant Vedic hymns incorrectly, you have this opposite influence. If you take Brahma Samhita, it says that you have to burn on fire, on a slow fire, a person that perverts children. Or you have to cut off a hand of a person that had stolen something. But if there's not enough sattva in the society, so these laws, they will make people very rigid and very cruel. So now we have judges, right? We have this. All our judges are not so perfect these days. That's why we don't have this death penalty anymore. We don't cut the hands off because the circumstances are different these days. These laws, these strict laws, they're not supposed to make people cruel. So we have to be in a mode of goodness, but we're not there. So we have this experience. Back in the day, we had some rats in our ashram in Leningrad, St. Petersburg these days. So there were some rats in there. There was a kitchen, and there was a lot of food in there, of course, food products, and we had some rats. And so brahmacārī would ask, what are we supposed to do? Of course, we are following the principle of ahimsa. So we understood that there's a soul in there, there's a supreme soul is in there. And there was a cook. So of course he was dealing with the products. He said that I would just kill them all, would kill all these rats. So I didn't know what to say back then. So he killed 2 rats, this person, and his personality has changed. So
Убить крысу было просто развлечение.
he actually started having
Это не сознание Кришны, как
some
Бога.
satisfaction out of it. This is not Krishna's consciousness. This is a terrible thing.
И мы стали искать другие способы, как это сделать.
So we started looking for some other methods to do it. Just imagine, on the one hand, this person starts to kind of protect the law
Вот в этом
and fairness, but he becomes very cruel.
как применить эти правила в
So the question is, how do we apply all these rules
гунах совсем, да, они неприменимы.
in other gunas these days? We cannot apply them so literally.
Сказал,
So Prabhupada also said that
когда его спросили,
to
учитель,
Brahmana
если
Samhita.
вы будете следовать ману самхите,
He said that if you follow Brahma Samhita, you will all become leches, you will become very cruel.
поэтому тут будьте осторожны.
So be careful here.
Можно поразмыслить Chaitanya Chandra Charan prabhu. Если позволите, пару минут.
So I wanted to
Наказание
add
не
something,
имеет
just
быть однозначно.
a couple of minutes.
Вот.
So of course punishment should take place.
Какие-то должны быть законы,
Obviously,
которые регулируют.
there should be some laws,
Почему?
regulating. regulative laws, because there are different people.
Есть
We have
категории
different
людей, их
level of
большинство
people.
Именно они учатся,
So most of the
что
people,
хорошо,
they
что плохо, через
learn
наказание,
to
через
differentiate
наказание.
bad from good through
Но
punishment.
наказание должны осуществлять именно,
But these
как вы
punishments
сказали, саттва, на платформе
should be
саттвы. Другими словами,
applied on the
движемся
platform of
сатвой,
sattva
движемся, чтобы возвысить.
with compassion
Я приведу пример, я уже
in order
говорил
to
несколько раз.
elevate these people.
Царь лично может отрубить
So I'll give you a
палец
hand.
молодому
A
человеку,
king
который
can
своровал.
cut off a finger of a person that has stolen something.
И царь понимает,
And the king,
что наказав его сейчас,
he understands that
голову, потому что
having
безнаказанно,
punished this person, he saves
безнаказанно
this
молодой
person.
человек может
If this person does not
преступление, может быть более
feel any punishment, next time he will do something even more terrible.
голову.
And in that case,
Любое
the king would have to cut off his head.
страданием, другими словами,
So each
сострадание
punishment should be with compassion, driven by compassion. So this is the
Поэтому
highest
государство
dharma,
есть это понимание, сострадание,
highest religion.
то тогда, конечно,
So if we have this
все эти
compassion in our
методы
society,
действительно
then all these regulations that we had listed,
полезны, потому что разные категории людей есть.
they will be
Кому-то
useful
достаточно сказать, кому-то
for other categories of people.
достаточно
Some people are
те
just,
книги, которые будут
they just need to be said something and they will understand it. But some people, they should be punished
ну, через боль и страдания.
through pain and suffering.
Вопрос ведическое или
So the
вайшнавское.
question
У
is
нас
either Vedic or
ведическое
Vaishnavic.
есть, дхарма-шастры есть. Но опять
So we
же,
both have Dharma Shastra, of course.
На платформе саттва-гуны минимум, а на платформе трансцендентного
But
знания.
again, on the platform of Sattva Guna and on the transcendental
Конечное
level.
благо живого существа. Поэтому
So we have to strive
идет сражение, битва, как
for
и
the bliss, for the benefit for the people. So that's why Krishna calls up to start the fight.
настоящим знанием.
But first you have to have this knowledge. Only
Еще
after
одно
that you have to
дополнение
fight.
по поводу очищения в святых местах.
So now that something else to add about the purification
Достаточно этого, зачем
at
наказывать?
the holy places.
Но в Бхагаватам говорится, что
So
очищение
in
в святых местах
Bhagavatam
подобно
says that
очищению слона в реке.
purification in sacred places is like the purification of an elephant in a lakes. So remember, they wash their bodies and then they put some dust back on the bodies. So still there has to be some punishment. The culture of punishment should exist. Because people, they come back to the sinful activities again. Until their hearts are pure, it will be continue to happen. That's why in Vedic culture there are some prisons. So spiritual regulations and punishments are all together. Once a person becomes a pure devotee, he's above, he's beyond all these regulations. He does not even have the semen of committing some sins.
Вопросы еще остались, Примананда Прабху?
Are there any questions, Brahmana Prabhu, on YouTube?
Chaitanya Chandra Charan Prabhu, у нас уже без 15, можно сказать.
So 15 minutes left, probably.
А сколько там вопросов сегодня?
Сколько вопросов?
How many questions do we have?
Я думаю, еще больше 10.
More than
Надеюсь,
10.
мы не успеем ответить. Ну, на один еще можем.
One more.
Один останется, 0 останется, если на один ответить.
Матаджа Расастхали. Как быть женам, мужья которых постоянно видят в обществе примеры таких развратных женщин? Как защитить ум мужа?
So wives, how they're supposed to react when the husbands see these perverted women in society all the time? So the role of wife in this situation is really prominent, especially in ISKCON. So in this case, a woman in ISKCON, any woman, to my point of view, he should take on the role of a mother. Not only wives should control their husbands, but also devotees, they should control man in this respect. Mother-like. I think that they have the full right to do that. Absolute right. So let me tell this story again. In about 1986 or 87, we're given a lecture in Leningrad. It was in like Oktober's Hall, the most prestigious concert halls of that time. So there was a scandal director over there, and we had to take part in that concert. It was such a mixed up show back then, like Vaishnavas together with some professional actors. So we put on torches, we were waiting for the right time to come out on the stage. We had our musical instruments, we were worrying very much, and we had to sing kirtan in that hall. So that's the way we were trying to preach back then. And there was a beauty contest back there. So he was imposed. Just think about the beauty contest of that time. There were no rules at all. The Soviet Union was taken apart. These were almost naked women. And they were also staying behind the scenes, waiting to get on stage. And you know what? We were actually standing next to each other, just imagine. We were wearing torches and musical instruments, mixed up with these half-naked women. So they were all with anxieties, but they, just because they were naked, they were already sexually, they were feeling sexy. And they would just come up to us, talking to us. Just imagine that layer of mire. Young women, of course, they were influencing us, just like in the paradise, you see. And there was one devotee with a wife. Just one wife was there. She saw it right away. She came up and he thought to himself, what are you looking at? What are you staring at? So he got afraid. That's his wife, right? He said, no, I'm not looking anywhere. And then she said again, what are you looking at? So she brought him down. So she totally took away all his man's energy. So he started looking straight into her eyes. And then she turned to us and she said, what are you looking at? Look at me. So she saved us all. We had this wonderful kirtan. So she saved us all. That was quite an anecdote back then. So we were young, not experienced at all, of course. So we didn't know how to react in such a situation. We didn't know what to look at. So she said us what to look at. Look at a devotee woman. A devotee woman. And when Prabhupada said, look at a pregnant woman. She is pure. When you look at a pregnant woman, you get purified. So if a pregnant woman walking down the street, you can look at her, that's okay. So these regulations that we have to have. So to my point of view, so motherly energy, mother's energy should be activated, should be reinforced in our society. So your question is actual, it is important. Can I ask just one more short question?
Попробуйте их вырвать из земли.
So plants, how do they manifest? How do they express their lust? So try to uproot a plant.
Самое трудное это
It's not so easy, right? When you uproot the trees, for example,
Да, держится, знаете.
they're holding on very strong. Such a lust in there.
То есть растения, они, у них очень
So
высокий
plants,
уровень себе.
they have a very high level of lust.
Если бы им дали возможность двигаться, Прабхупада
If
говорит,
they were
они бы
given
очень много зла принесли
a
гибели.
possibility of moving,
Но
they
они не
would
подвержены этому полезно.
cause a lot of miseries.
Тяжелой ноте мы
That's why they're so stable. They cannot move.
Спасибо всем.
So we are finishing on that today.
Bhagavatam ki jai.
Да, и
Jada Prabhupada ki jai. Your name is Chaitanya Chandra Charan prabhu ki jai. Nitai Gaur Manande Hare Hare. Спасибо всем.
So thank you,
Читать
everybody. Tomorrow we will continue reading Bhagavatam. So His Grace,
Браджамани Прабhu.
Brahmacārī Prabhu will be reading tomorrow.